I want to jump in because this topic really is going to be an important one as we get into this subject that is, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding around the subject, and I think we need to have a good Christ-centered biblical approach to the subject of racism. So that's what I really want us to do, is to focus on that. I am so pleased to be joined by a friend that I love, John MacKay from Down Under in Australia. John, thank you for joining me.
G'day, g'day, g'day. And how are you, mate?
I am blessed beyond measure. And John, not to be too hard on you, but in order to help interpret everything you say, you have brought on your English friend and my new friend, Joseph. Joseph, thanks for hanging out with me today, man.
It's really good to be here. Thank you very much for having me.
Now, I want to let our viewers know that we got some extreme time zones going on. It is 7 o'clock Central Time Zone here in the United States of America. Joseph, you're over in the UK, is that right?
Yeah, that is correct. Yes.
And
it's
what time
very,
is it there?
Very early. It's 1 o'clock in the morning right now.
It's 1 a.m.
So,
oh my goodness. And then,
so, yes.
and then we got John down in Australia, down under. And John, what time is it?
Already tomorrow. Already tomorrow. Australia.
He is in the future, ladies and gentlemen. We can talk to the future right now. You even got that crazy professor look. I bet if you did your hair, you could do just like Back to the Future if you really got it up there.
Used to be able to. The older I get, the more downhill it goes.
Well, I'm excited to have both of you guys here. You guys actually direct a lot of research, both for the UK division of Creation Research and the Australian division of Creation Research. John, can you fill us in on kind of what you do? And you've been kind of really a pioneer in a lot of areas, and definitely an outspoken person on the subject of creation versus evolution. But can you tell our audience a little bit about yourself real quick?
Okay. Just a little bit that's related to our topic today. I do collect a lot of fossils, found that one yesterday, and because I spend a lot of time in the bush, I've interacted a lot with the Australian Aboriginal people. I actually end up doing DVDs like this, which you can download as an MP4 from our main Creation Research website, related to the subject, skin colors, etc. I write books for kids. I'm just a big kid myself, really. But in reality, this deals with the key issue we're going to get to today. Adam and Eve, the problem of race and racism really starts right there. Oh, and two last things. I have one nice Aboriginal axe. That's the first Stone Age tool I ever found. So are they people on the way up are going to invent metal tools, or did they start there and they've ended up downhill? And you won't get this one. Eric, can you tell me what that is?
That is a green leafy vegetable that I probably would not eat if it was on salad.
Well, it is edible, to be surprised, but it's a green rose. Right?
No way.
And, it is, yes. And the reason I have that here today is there's a paper that I'm going to hold up. You might be able to read it, but I'll read the other side. It's on race. And people need to know that to deal with this subject, we need to actually define race. The paper, Identification of Polymorphism Within the Roses, a gene linked to resistance to multiple races, right? So this word race and racism existed way before the USA got involved in all sorts of conflicts that come about as a result. So keep the green rose in mind.
We will keep that one in mind tonight. And you've been training up young Joseph. I get to even call him young now at my age. Joseph, tell us what's going on in UK and what you're up to.
In the UK, we're up to lots of different things. Basically, at the beginning of this sort of COVID-19 pandemic, and what turned out to be a nightmare, really, I was actually in the States. We were doing some research and we were doing some ministry in Tennessee and around that area. And then the pandemic comes and you have to jump on the first plane and try and get back, and all sorts of horrendous stuff. But since we have got back, it's been fairly quiet in terms of normality with ministry, you know, going and speaking in churches and getting out and doing research, because we've been completely on lockdown in the UK. But some of the things we have been doing is focusing on our book writing, focusing on the sort of research that we can do, or at least the catch up on the research. And I'll just put up a little website on the screen there, creationresearch.net. You can find out lots more about the work we're doing there. You can also actually go and have a look at our YouTube site. If I put up our social media on Facebook and on YouTube, we have plenty of different programs. We put together a sort of thrown together TV series at the last minute called Creation Research Unplugged, which we sort of filmed in the UK, but featured people from all over the world, filmed in sort of their back garden. But many of our scientists and experts who sort of came together to help produce this and put this together. So that's what we've been up to. And perhaps the most exciting thing for my life is that on the 11th of September, which is just a few days away now, I will be getting married, as it's finally legal to do so in the UK after the pandemic.
Wow. Well, congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Man, that is great. I'm sure John and I could spend the next couple hours giving you some advice on that, buddy.
I'm sure.
I've got 21 years under my belt. John, how many you got?
52.
Wow. Amazing. Amazing. Well, guys, the reason I asked you here by tonight, by the way, John, I think it was Bob who said, just wanted you to know, many years ago, you came to his church in Renton, Washington, and took a group of them to Flaming Geyser Park to look for fossils.
Yeah,
several years ago. Very cool. The reason I asked you guys here tonight is because here in America, we have this issue going on, as you know, with the Black Lives Matter movement, the Black Lives Matter saying the quote, Black Lives Matter, which, by the way, I would classify as two very different things, the movement and the phrase Black Lives Matter. We've got protests happening in the street. We've got extreme chaos in many places where people are trying to rise up. And I find the whole thing almost surreal. I'll tell you, I grew up really without considering skin color. We did a bus route as a kid, and my dad would take me, and we would pick up kids from the projects and bring them to church. And we just had a blast. I grew up with Latino friends, Mexican friends, Black friends. I really never saw skin color as an issue or with this idea, this concept of racism. And I was speaking at a church I want to say this was about 10 years ago. I was in South Georgia, and maybe I was just simply naive, but I got done speaking, and in the message, I presented the idea that there is only one race. It's the human race. We're all of one blood. Kind of went from scripture and talked through this. Afterwards, the pastor approached me and he said, I just want to make it clear. You're not saying that whites and blacks are the same, are you? They're not the same race. And I was visibly shocked. It took me by surprise so much. I thought he might be joking. I did not have words to express my confusion in that moment. And so I just simply went back to the scripture, kind of confused. And he said, no, whites and blacks are not the same race. I ended up basically dusting dusting the dirt from my shoes when I left that church, and obviously was never invited back because of my views that we are all one race, the human race. And so I want to kind of just unpackage this idea of racism, where it came from, why we have it, and then what is the ultimate cure for racism. John, you wrote an article that I read it's been a couple months ago, and it really kind of hit me hard the way you presented the idea of race and some of the things you presented there. So would you mind talking to us a little bit and just launching us on this idea of racism?
Now, like you, I grew up in a world in which if someone said someone was colored, you'd ask, what do you mean? My uncle employed Aboriginal black-skinned people, and we went down and visited them. Their kids played like we played, but they never went to church on time. There was a cultural difference. I mean, to the Aborigines, their attitude to white Christians is, this is your God, right? You do whatever this little watch says, right? We just deal with people. Okay, so there's cultural differences that can be recognized. Now, remember I brought up my green rose before and read the article on race. Now, the word race goes back a long way, long before this conflict occurred in Alabama. Like you, I was preaching in Birmingham one year, and I deliberately picked the origin of skin colors and races and that. And like you, I've never been invited back, right?
Wow.
You could see the anger that was in those people's eyes to have a belief that we all got off one big tower, we all got off one boat. We're all boat people, right? And we all came from one family, Adam and Eve. Okay, but you'll find it's a lot more helpful to use not just the concept of one race, the word race itself, you need to understand, and the biblical history of the real problem here. I'm going to read from scripture, a very important verse. It's Genesis chapter 5, and it's verse 3. It says, Adam lived 130 years. Now, compared to you and me, that's old, right? And then he had kids. You and I don't even want to think about kids when we're 130. So the world is different in the beginning. Adam is the first man. And it says, he had a son in his own likeness, after his image, and he called that son Seth. Now, most people, creationists particular, love the concept we're made in God's image. And that is true. But then sin comes in chapter 3. And by the time you get to chapter 5, there's one step down the ladder. Adam has kids, but they're no longer regarded as made in God's image. It says after the likeness of Adam, made in the image of Adam. Problem, Adam's a sinner. Hey, Eric's a sinner. John MacKay's a sinner. And from then on, the history of the world goes downhill. Because you see, the reason for Adam, the concentration on Seth, is that the previous son, who was a good guy, Abel, has just been killed. Why? Adam's a sinner. He's now got 2 kids, Cain and Abel, and a couple of daughters, right? And there's murder in the family. A murder? Why? Well, one son seems to have been jealous of the other. He picked a difference. The difference? Hey, my brother Abel, he's just a godly church creep, right? He just does whatever God says. I can't stand that. I'll deal with him and beat his brains out. Now, whether he used a stone tool or what, we really don't know. But in reality, Cain kills Abel over differences because sin is a problem. I'm pretty sure Cain and Abel were pretty much the same color, right? They had one parent, Adam, one parent, Eve, male and female, no homosexuality, none of those differences, but nevertheless, there was a moral, spiritual, cultural difference that led to murder. By the time you get up to Noah, you find that Noah has a son, and his son is called Ham. He has another son, Shem, and another son, Japheth. And what's interesting is those names are tied to color. So that if you follow the history of the word Ham's associated with the Hamites, the people in Egypt. Egypt is hot. Well, you go and have a look at the Hebrew word for hot and cooked and baked and black, and it's Ham, right? So therefore, black becomes associated with a difference that's recognizable. Likewise, Japheth. Read some of your old concordances. Noah had a son who was white because Japheth means fair. Now, these names point out differences. Now, I have one daughter, her name is Bronwyn. Bronwyn is Welsh for fair one. So guess what coloured hair she's got? She's blonde, blue-eyed, right? She's very Japhethetic, you could say, in biblical terms. I can tell her apart from an Aboriginal any day. Now, what's this got to do with races? Well, the word race, the same one that's used to write the article on why do we have green roses in which the petals have failed to form and so leaves grow instead, and even Eric could eat it if he liked, right? And roses are edible, they're just not too tasty for you and I if you used to Kentucky Fried or anything like that. So what you find is, where does the word race come from? Well, we English, I still regard myself as English because my dad came from there and I have a British passport, which is really handy, and I can visit many racial groups around Europe. Racial groups? Yes, because some of the worst racism I've ever seen has been in Europe. I was in Romania just after communism collapsed, and my Jewish guide said, have you ever wondered why there was such terrible prisons and persecution of the Christians and the ex-communists after World War II. Sorry, of the Germans after World War II. I said, yes, but I don't know why. He said, because the Jews deliberately got jobs as prison guards so they could punish anybody who was put in of German extraction or Christian extraction. I thought, whoa, differences, religion this time, history, culture are leading to white people killing off white people, because the Jews may be slightly browner than you and me, but as a culture, they are uniquely different. Okay, race. The English borrowed it from the French. The French got it from the Italians. Race used to apply to roses and grapes and wine. You could buy this race of wine versus that race of wine because they could be distinguished. You go one step further, they got it from the Italians. And the Italians like their vino, you know. So you find that they had that difference as well. But the Italians, they were influenced by the Arabics because all the trading is going through there. There were Arabic pirates who persecuted the Christians and took them as slaves. Hey, light brown, and took white slaves. By the time you get back to Arabic, Arabic is the cousin of Hebrew, and the Hebrew word for the same sort of distinguishable headship. This rose gives green roses. That rose gives red roses. They have different headship. The word Rosh appears, from which we get all our words like race. The head of a family, if there's a distinction. Is it Cain? Is he a Japhethite? Is he a Hamite? It's a word for headship. Okay, so headship, Abraham is the head of both the Jews and the Arabs. They are essentially the one racial group separated by religion and culture. I'm not in their Rosh or their race. I'm a Japhethite. Now that gives me enough differences so you can tell me apart from an Aboriginal, right? And so the word race originally occurred to pick the differences. So I love telling people now, can you distinguish me from an Aboriginal? Actually, I did this deliberately to 2 Indians just recently. I had an Aboriginal picture and I held it up and I said to these Indians, where does this man come from? And they said, oh, he's definitely from India, because Aborigines actually are from India. You can go to India and you can see the Santal Hill people, you can see our Australian native dogs, you can see boomerangs. So their headship, they are not indigenous in the absolute meaning of the word. They came like the English did, right? They are migrants. They just got here a little bit before Captain Cook. So they are racially distinct in terms of many reasons. One is the clock, right? A friend of mine went to a wedding recently and the wedding was supposed to start at 8. By 9 o'clock, no one had turned up. By 10 o'clock, no one had turned up. 11 o'clock, he went home. The Aborigines complained, why weren't you at the wedding? We started about 2. Right, so it didn't what time they started. Joseph, don't you dare do that. I'm supposed to give a speech at his wedding. So what you find is there's a bit of the history of the word race, and it helps you because we come from one family. We are one blood, which is why the one blood of Jesus solves the real problem that Adam gave birth to sinners. Seth is the first one. You and I, my Aboriginal brothers, what's their problem? It's not the fact that they're black. It's not even the fact that they don't like wearing a watch. It's the fact that they're first of all cut off from God by a problem called sin, and only Jesus provides the racial, get you back in the one family. We get the one head again. We become the one race, the one Rosh. Jesus is our head. So there's a little insight in all of that.
So when we talk about racism, it really is coming back to originally headship. What is the head of our group or our? That's interesting. So today it seems like they've really lost track of what the original term meant when they use the word racism today.
I'm afraid that is the case. It's more noticeable in the USA, where this has become a cultural and a big political issue. Like the Black Lives Matter issue, they've tried to spread it to Australia. They've had their street riots, just like you've got over there, nowhere near as big a scale, because the Australians don't think in the same way as most of the American politics divides the country up over there. So that when you look at Aboriginal Christians, if their heart is right before God and they want Christ to be our head, well, I was talking to an Aboriginal lady. She was Auntie Jackie, right? Now, we just knew each other as if we'd known each other for eternity. And she said, you come talk to our young people? Right? No, I'm white, a totally different culture. But when you know Christ, you are in the one family of man, because the one blood, if I can just emphasize the fact that when Adam sinned, the wages of sin is death. You know that scripture that confuses many people about blood transfusions, that life is in the blood. But the real spiritual significance is when you actually sin, you die. When you die, you need new blood, right? When Jesus shed his blood, and that's why it's so essential you stick to the fact that Jesus' blood was shed for anybody, no matter what color your skin is. Your sin is the same color problem on the inside. So that one blood message is real key, no matter how many different racial groups or headships. We all got off Noah's Ark. We had 3 main heads after that. Then you subdivide. Abraham became a special head of 2 other groups. But I'll be blunt. The Jews need Jesus as much as the Aborigines do, as much as the Japhethites do.
In Revelation chapter 5, verses, really right there in chapter 5, verse 9, it talks about how they're going to sing a new song, and it's going to say, you are worthy to take the scroll and to open its seals, for you were slain, and you have redeemed us to God by your blood. And that's what you were just talking about. Out of every tribe and tongue and people and nation. And I do believe that the cure for racism, it's not a skin problem, it is a sin problem. And the cure is to understand what Christ did on the cross, recognizing his love, that he shed his blood for you, and that you and I have no excuse not to love other people, because God loved you when you were unlovable. And God tells us to love others even if they are unlovable. Joseph, Oh, go ahead, John.
Can I throw in one more point on that because of that verse you just quoted? If you look up your Greek concordance on those verses in Revelation, you'll find the word tribe has the meaning for race. All right, so the tribal groups have a headship. That's why they're a separate tribe. And so even the Greek actually implies the word race, and it's in your Greek concordance. So look it up, and it's treating them as separate groups. And I'm glad in the new heavens and new earth, we'll still be recognizable as having separate different points, but no longer will the sin of our heart cause that to be an issue of vision.
Wow. We do seem to divide very easily over ideologies, over people love getting in groups and trying to find protection in group ideology rather than in individualism. And I think we should be seeing people as individuals. Joseph, you are over there in the UK. And when I did some studying on slavery and had to write a paper in college about slavery, I was shocked to discover that there have been more whites in history that were slaves than blacks in history that were slaves. Not condoning either one, but I think of England and William Wilberforce and the slave trade and what was happening. And you're right over there where a lot of these things have taken place. There's been a lot of slavery in the history of the world. When it comes to this whole subject of racism and where did racism come from, what comes to your mind? What do you think through?
Yeah, so it's a big thing in the UK. I mean, we have a very, very long history, and we have a very long history, not just with sort of British Empire, but all the way back through the kings and the queens, through to the invaders of the Anglo-Saxons, then way back into the Romans. We were part of the Roman Empire, and at one point we were considered essentially the same country. I mean, you could be standing basically in Wales, or you could be standing over in Iraq, and you're essentially in the same country because you're in the same kind of empire, right? So there's a great big spreading of history throughout the United Kingdom. And what I'd like to do, if it's all right, we're just going to delve into this idea of slavery and also sort of springboard off what John has just explained about race, and make the point that when you come to slavery, particularly when you come to racism, there is often very little to do with race, because racism and race can actually be 2 completely separate things. It's the root of the problem which is really causing your issues. And just as you just mentioned, as we sort of delve into this and look into this, I am by no way condoning one type of slavery over another type of slavery. What I'm trying to do is get you to understand the big picture. And I say that, I'm going to put a Bible verse up here. Who said this? Beware of false science, it will lead you astray. And the answer is Paul to Timothy in 1 Timothy 6:20. That's a paraphrase. I encourage all of our viewers to go and read the whole chapter because it's a fantastic chapter. But in the King James Bible, at least, it really does use this word science, because we've come today to recognize science as a particular branch of something that you study. But the reality is science is the old Greek word for knowledge. So the warning which Paul is giving to Timothy here is beware of false science, beware of false knowledge, because it will lead you astray. Of course, the flip reverse to that is that true science, true knowledge will point you towards Christ. But it's a warning that Paul is giving to Timothy to watch out, to be careful of the false science. And quite frankly, well, your president is very keen on using the fake news thing. It really is true. You need to be careful of the false information, of the fake news, of the false science that's out there. A final point before we delve into it. This is something that John has taught me many, many times. If you don't ask the right questions, don't expect to get the right answers. So many times, just by simply asking questions and delving a little bit further behind the news, so to speak, you can actually find out a lot of information yourself. Okay, so slavery through the ages, we need to have a full perspective. We need to have a true perspective. Remember Paul's warning to Timothy, but also, most importantly, we need a biblical perspective. And we need to understand what we're actually dealing with when we delve into this issue and when we begin to go down this issue. So the first point, it's very popular, particularly, it sort of took a while to get to this stage with Britain, but certainly for a very long time, there was this idea that British colonialism was evil. It was the pure source of slavery moving over to the Atlantic, and it consisted of British slave traders who were going into Africa, kidnapping children, kidnapping women, kidnapping people, dragging them away from their families, taking them across to the West Indies and selling them over there. That's the sort of standard story which you are told. But of course, just as John went back into the history of the word race, it can be very useful to go back into the history of the word slavery. Okay, what is the word meaning of slavery? Where is its origin? And has it always been connected to this idea of one type of coloured person over another type of coloured person? This idea of inherent racism. Slavery, the word slavery was first used in 1550. It came from the root word slave, which meant to toil or to work really hard. So you were the slave to the grind is still a phrase that we use today, you know, slaving over the hot coals, cooking your dinner, whatever. It's still a word that we use today. And it's a word that we use in that sense. It's used exactly the same as it was originally kind of intended. It was sort of referring to actually doing something over and over again, working hard and being captured by your work. It did not actually refer to the keeping of slaves until 1728. So go one step further. Where does the word slave come from? It was first used in the 13th century. It comes from the root word Slav. Slav, or the Slavic people, the people from northern Russia, that region, they were very often captured, very often taken into slavery. And so after a while, their name actually became associated with the idea of kidnapping, owning these people and putting them to work. But the important thing to realize is go past British colonialism, go past the transatlantic slavery, go past even the Slavic slavery, and you have a history of slavery which is ingrained in most of the world's civilizations throughout the entire history of the world. I mean, you remember the children of Israel, they'd gone to Egypt and then they got taken as slaves and they got put to work. Hey, the Egyptians built a society which was based on slavery, particularly based on actually going out and capturing lands and trading other people's enemies and bringing them back as slaves. And that's what happened in the case of the children of Israel. Slave before slave. So if slave didn't really come into use until the 1300s and it wasn't even referred to as, you know, owning a human being, what was it called before then? Well, there's an interesting little history lesson here, because in Europe in around the year 850, so we're going way, way back in sort of, you know, Vikings and Anglo-Saxons and the Dark Ages, as it was called, people were using an old Roman reference to refer to slaves, which is well, or that is the old English translation of Britain. Britain Britain as in Britain, the country. Britain as in Britannia. Britain is in the area which was taken over by the Romans and sort of conquered all of the tribes, and they took slaves. Yeah, there's actually a unique history in the word slave. If you go back to before the actual physical word slave was around, a commonly used word to refer to as a slave was Britain. Reason why? Well, Britain has a very, very long history of slavery, and it's not us making the slaves, it's us being the slaves. The Scots versus the English. We hated each other, and we've sort of got over our differences now, but we would go up there and take slaves. They would come down and take slaves all throughout the Celtic time. English versus the Scots, Irish versus the English, English versus the Irish, Irish versus the Scots and the English, Irish, Scots and English versus the French. And then finally we had the Roman Empire, who really was versus everyone and would invade a land and specifically take many people captive to actually take them back to work as slaves of Rome. And it was a way of stamping their authority on the land by actually going into a new country and saying, look, you don't want to mess with us because we're going to take a proportion of your strongest men back with us to work as slaves. The Roman Empire was built on slavery. This is white man versus white man. Nothing to do with color, but everything to do with a lesson of dominion, a lesson of power, a lesson of, I want to actually prove my authority over you, and I'm going to do this by actually enslaving you. So it's really important to note at this point, slavery has nothing to do with skin color. Slavery has nothing to do with race, but it has everything to do with the root of the problem. Our final point, race is used as an excuse for evils when the reality is the root of the evil is what really needs dealing with. And the root of the evil is this, Jeremiah 17:9. The heart of man is desperately wicked.
Thank you for joining us for this engaging conversation. To view this and many more conversations in their entirety, we invite you to partner with us at creationtoday.org/partner.